So the Natural Future of Cosmetics team at MTU Kerry are delighted to welcome our guest speakers for today's R&D funding event. And this is the third event in the NACO project. My name is Aoife Kern and I am Network and Innovation Support Officer on this project. Today we are delighted to welcome Tomás Hayes from Kerry Local Enterprise Office and Mark Whelan from Enterprise Ireland to give an overview of funding opportunities available for Irish cosmetic SMEs. Following this, we will have speakers representing 3 technology gateways, giving an insight into how R&D funding can be used. And then we plan to finish up with a Q&A session around 12 p.m. So let's get started. I'll now hand you over to Tomás Hayes from Kerry Local Enterprise Office to share his slides. Thanks very much, Tomás.
Okay. Good morning, everybody. My name is Tomás Hayes. I'm head of the Local Enterprise Office. We're a unit within Kerry County Council, and our primary remit is to support the smaller business sector, what we call the micro business sector. And these are businesses employing 10 or less people. I suppose ultimately businesses have to start someplace, so there's always that early stage engagement before those businesses hopefully grow and move on to our colleagues, we'll say, within Enterprise Ireland, and again linked closely with the other enterprise support agencies that are out there. Our own role, again, it's a multifunctional role. As I said earlier, I suppose part of our role is just, we'll say, looking at business information. Again, businesses have a lot of, our early stage businesses have a lot of queries at the outset in terms of what levels of support are available. And again, this can be quite confusing. We provide financial and training support. Part of our role is to encourage the broader entrepreneurship in the county. And again, we work very closely with our colleagues in the Enterprise Development Unit and the Economic Development Unit in Kerry County Council, again, looking at broader economic development in terms of infrastructure and so on in the county. I'm firstly going to talk about business information and advisory services. And I often throw up this slide and it just highlights some of the support mechanisms that are out there. You might note I have placed the MTU at the center of the slide again, because we were speaking here today. But again, I often ask people, what does BIM do? You know, what is the role of Intertrade Ireland? What is the role of microfinance? And many of the early business startups are very much unsure and unaware of what is out there. So again, part of our role as an enterprise office is looking at the whole area of business information and advisory services. And if we cannot support people directly ourselves in terms of our own funding mechanisms, our advisory mechanisms, again, where things get quite technical, we offer referral service, again, to other agencies and make the introductions. But I think the whole landscape and the environment out there, yes, we have a hugely supportive environment in Ireland and in Kerry, I might add, but it can be confusing for those businesses in the early stages of startup. And it's absolutely essential to have some form of guidance in terms of where to go looking for support. And again, why is business information so important? In the early stages of business, it is the owner, manager who drives the business. And yes, that enthusiasm, that commitment is so important in the early stages of that business. But again, that can limit the business itself because I suppose the business knowledge is confined to the business owner, and that business owner needs to look beyond that and engage. So I often roll out the question, I say, you know, there's no such thing as a stupid question. There are people who've been out there. There is a very supportive environment amongst the businesses themselves, and there is a very good and strong supportive environment within the agencies in terms of direction and practical advice. Now, I'm just going to touch on the support mechanisms. Again, we would have 4 core support mechanisms within the local enterprise office. And again, I mentioned earlier that number of 10 or less employees, because as businesses grow, they would engage closely with our sister agency, Enterprise Ireland. But our core financial supports are tied to that grouping. Again, small businesses or micro businesses employing 10 or less. And within our core offering, we have 4 specific structures. The first one of those is feasibility study support. Again, this is looking at market research. It looks at consultancy. It looks at technical development of a product. Again, there are elements of own labor that would be eligible within the scheme itself and miscellaneous supports. And again, that grant comes to €15,000. And again, it's based on 50% of funding, net overall cost. So it is a scheme that is there. It can be used in tandem with other schemes. People often ask me, do I need to do a feasibility study before moving on to other supports? You don't. I'd often take a very practical view that somebody should enroll in something like a business startup program, and through that process undertake the feasibility and development of the business itself. The second support mechanism is what we call a business priming grant. Again, business priming grants, I often describe this to people as being a dinner menu. Within the business priming grant, there would be 4 or 5 independent structures that people can apply for. One of those, for example, would be looking at equipment purchase, capital elements of the business growth. There's an employment support mechanism within that. There's also a facility where people can upgrade their utilities, for example, 3-phase power, and then again engage in, we'll say, consultancy services, securing of consultancy services. That's 50%, and I mentioned 50%, that big red 50%, that applies to the various grant structures. Business expansion grant is exactly the same as the business priming grant, except it applies to businesses more than 18 months of age. And the final grant there would be what is known as a technical assistance for micro exporter, or what we call TAME. So if a business is looking at exploring overseas markets, the business needs to attend a trade fair, demonstrate or show their products, exhibit the products. There's a small fund available there of €2,500 to support economy flights, pay for the trade fair exhibition costs and so on, and anything associated with the trade fair itself. So they would be our 4 core structures. Looking beyond that, I suppose in terms of general eligibility guidelines for those core funding structures, again, it is contained within this slide. Again, not apply greater than 10 people and so on. And obviously there has to be a market product for the service. People need to prove what they're about in terms of making an application. Again, there's a difference between new and established businesses in terms of the application. Like if you're a new business, again, you mightn't have financial accounts and so on. But then again, somebody starting a business in the early stages, it's all about the character of the person. It's about their knowledge of the product. It is about presenting their proposal in a concise way that makes perfect sense, linking the financials with the market, with the product, and people need to have that laid out correctly and properly. If you're established businesses looking for support, then again, we would be looking at financial accounts and so on, particularly over the last 3 years, just to see where the business is placed. And again, these can raise questions in terms of the future market and where the business is going. But again, it's back to the individual, back to the business, prove that the concept makes sense, there's a market for the product, and there's money to be made from that ambition. I often again present that if I went to you looking for money, what questions would you ask of me? And if you can answer those questions, you're going a long way in terms of presenting an application. Our application forms are online. Again, there is an opportunity within the application the process itself. We can monitor those applications remotely ourselves. There's a facility where you can make a presentation yourself, a 2-minute presentation, telling us about your business. Because as I say, a picture often paints 1,000 words in terms of the character of the applicant and so on. We have a number of non-core financial supports as well. And again, over the last year and a half, we've been very busy, particularly in terms of our trading online voucher scheme. There's been a lot of emphasis nationally at government level in terms of the whole area of digitalization and trading. And I think we've been catapulted forward over the last 2 years with COVID. But the trading online voucher scheme is basically looking at a business developing its e-commerce capability. There's a small support mechanism there of €2,500 based on 50%. And I stress the e-commerce capability has to be shown and proven. And again, these would apply across a lot of businesses. I spoke earlier about restrictions in terms of 10 and so on, but generally our software supports, we do open those up a little bit further, or those non-core supports. A new scheme that is coming down the track, and it's going to be launched in March. Our colleagues in Enterprise Ireland probably operate it already, but it's a digital scheme, a digital for micro, specifically for the local enterprise office clients. And again, it's looking at the internal digitalization within businesses, looking at the customer experience, linking with customers, looking at data and analytics, and it looks at optimizing communications within the business, cutting out repetitive work and so on. It's just looking at the general efficiency through digitalization. And again, there'll be a lot of emphasis on this sector as we move forward. We also provide support to microfinance loan support, Microfinance Ireland scheme. It's a loan scheme for businesses who might have had difficulty or who presently have difficulty in accessing, we'll say, core financial institutional loans. And again, this scheme has been quite busy over the past while. Again, the loans are relatively small, up to 25,000, but again, it's a starting point for small businesses. And again, we point in terms of the external funding supports. Again, our colleagues in Enterprise Ireland, we have a range of supports, particularly in the intellectual property area, agile schemes and so on, often supported by the colleges and research facilities in terms of various products and research development. And these would apply particularly in the cosmetic sector. People often approach us about funding, but I'm a great believer myself in terms of the whole training services. Businesses have to start somewhere, whether it's pre-enterprise, working through the business startup process, the business growth, getting through that valley of debt, as we call it, until they start making, until they turn to profitability and so on. So I suppose in terms of the programs we do offer, basically it's based on the business life cycle itself. For example, at the moment we're running a business growth program. I don't call them specifically management development programs. I call them business growth programs because we're targeting a specific cohort. And again, would say just taking that business growth program is we are very selective in terms of who we would take onto that program. Again, where that business has to be out there for 3 or 4 years. It is looking at looking internally, looking at the business itself, looking at the margins and trying to improve profitability at the end of the day. To say the business startup programs are core to what we do. Again, as I mentioned earlier, I almost treat a business startup program as a feasibility support where the business must engage and actually carry out the research and develop its proposals over time. Again, over the next while, there's going to be a lot of emphasis and continuing emphasis on the whole area of lean, green sustainability. Again, how does this fit within the cosmetic sector? I think it's going to be really interesting. Huge emphasis again at the moment in terms of the whole digital marketing area. And this all knits together through a mentoring programs that we operate. So on a one-to-one basis, people can look at specific advice and support. As I said earlier, micro lessons for micro businesses. Again, a lot of the smaller businesses, they're so busy engaging in longer term programs is always problematic. So again, doing programs where people can actually dip in and dip out and avail of those as they move along. And again, everything is underpinned by ongoing research and consultation and discussions with our client base to ensure that what we're offering makes sense to them. Range of other programs, I'm not going to go into these, but again, you know, it is important at the local level that we do have these collaborations. Again, that people are not fearful of contacting the agencies and engaging with them. I think it's important to emphasize there is no such thing as a silly or stupid question, as long as you get a right answer. And again, it's important that people do engage, network, collaborate, refer, and so on. Like I think this program or this discussion this morning is going to be particularly interesting. I suppose from our own role, we would have limited engagement with the cosmetic sector, but over the years we have worked with a number of smaller operators, again, who would be perhaps selling through the likes of the farmers markets to be, I suppose, business consumer based direct contact. I think the whole cosmetics industry, it's really interesting. If you look at the various trends that are out there at the moment, health and well-being being one of them. Natural cosmetics, sourcing of products. Obviously, there's a whole safety needs, health considerations, and so on in this sector. is quite interesting. We do a lot of work ourselves at the moment with SuperValue. We have a Food Academy program running presently. And again, the food, cosmetics side, well, there's similar linkages, but one of the recent contacts with SuperValue, they were querying us nationally in terms of local enterprise offices. Was there a range of wellbeing products available or wellbeing contacts out there that SuperValue would like to engage with to, again, place that product range, if it was possible, alongside the local food products. So I think there's huge interest in this area. And again, I welcome the opportunity to speak today. And again, I'm sure I'm going to learn a lot today. So thank you, Ethan.
Great. Thanks very much for a very informative presentation, Tomas. It was great to hear from the local enterprise office here today. So as I mentioned earlier, we'll have time for questions on the presentations towards the end of the event. So next up, I'd like to introduce you to Mark Whelan from Enterprise Ireland, who will chat through the funding mechanisms available from EI. So thank you for sharing your screen there, Mark, and I'll hand it over to you.
No bother. Thank you, Aoife, and good morning, everybody. So I'm pretty much, like Tomas, going to just talk through a number of the various options that are available to people through Enterprise Ireland funding supports. I'm the program manager from the Technology Gateway Network in Enterprise Ireland, and you're going to hear from some of the people working in the gateways about how these actual funding mechanisms operate, I hope. So I'm not going to go into the huge detail, more just the application process and what's available. And as Tomas said, there are other ones available as well, such as Agile and digitalization vouchers, lean supports. A lot of them are available to Enterprise Ireland clients only, or you have to be a client of some of the agencies. So I'm going to focus on two today and explain how we go through those. But just to start, talk you through what the Technology Gateway Network is. So it's a network of 16 hubs around the country, and they're basically access points into the Institutes of Technologies and Technological Universities. And they're your avenues in to find technical support for R&D solutions. So no matter where you are in the country, there is hopefully one local to you. And it doesn't have to be the expertise of the local gateway that you're accessing there. If you even just want to go in and start talking to people about what a gateway can do for you, you don't have to necessarily just go into the one that might be the final provider of the information for you. So it's open access to all around the country. So the role of the gateways, as I said, is to provide that access. The current program is running 2018-2022, and it's a just short of €27 million investment from Enterprise Ireland. And when you think that that doesn't pay for the research, that's just paying for the people in the gateways, it is a considerably large investment that we make in that, because we know the value it gives to companies. The staff typically act as business development resources and project managers for the work that you ultimately do with them, but they don't carry out the research. And the three primary routes to paying for working with the gateways are to utilize the innovation vouchers, the innovation partnership programs, or direct funding where the companies pay for the work themselves. And I'm going to concentrate today on the vouchers and innovation partnerships, but just to give you an idea of how many companies and how many projects we've had. So since the program started in 2013, we've done just shy of 5,700 projects that it is now, with nearly 4,000 companies, and that's a value of just shy of 50 million at the moment, of which more than half is cash contributed from industry. So you can see companies are putting their money where their mouth is with that level of investment. We also cluster into three groups to try and help companies understand in a way what's on offer as well, and to show that it's not just one gateway that you have to work with. The gateways will cluster if you need work from more than one of them. So they're in applied IoT, and engineering, materials and design, and food beverage technologies, which is where Shannon ABC sits. So I suppose it's most relevant today. And you know, I'm not going to go through these, but they're just the maps of where the various clusters are, and they exist. And Aoife will share my presentation with you afterwards, so you can go through that and find that information. So as I said, number of different ways you can interact with the gateways, and I'm going to talk about just two of them really in detail. So innovation vouchers and innovation partnerships. Innovation vouchers are typically 5,000 or 10,000 if you're using a match voucher. And innovation partnerships really have no limit, bottom end or top end, and I'll talk through them more individually in the actual slides. So What's an innovation voucher? Well, it's €5,000 that a company can get to go and interact with what's called a research performing organization, or an RPO, and that's typically any of the third level institutes in the country. The primary objective is to build links between the institutes and companies and helping them to grow and develop and do things that they wouldn't normally be able to do. A company is now entitled to 4 vouchers. So there's a lot of work you can get done. We typically say to companies, if you're doing and plan to do a number of vouchers, that the work that you do should be different across each of them. So for example, if you have a larger project, you could stage it. So you can do the first part and even check that that's feasible or it works before moving on to the others. The advantage of the innovation vouchers is to be eligible, you just need to have a company registration office number, CRO number. You don't need to be a client of any of the agencies. And you can see that since 2013 that the gateways themselves have delivered over 1,700 vouchers worth about €9.1 million. So we do a lot of them through the Technology Gateway Programme. It's an online system, very easy form to fill out. You go into innovationvouchers.ie and you can download the form. There's also an email address there if you have any queries. And basically what you do on the application form is tell us what you want to do with it. And we do some quick eligibility checks just to make sure that, look, that is research that you're doing. And I suppose that's the key thing here, that if you're working with an RPO, a high-level institute, it has to be research. It can't be commercial work that you could go and get from another supplier for various state aid rules. That's how that applies. And as I said, it's just a simple case of having a CRO. We approve probably around 800 vouchers a year, and about 600 to 700 actually get used. So obviously there is some people who, for various reasons or whatever, don't do them or don't utilize them. But there isn't, for want of a better word, a limit on how many we'll actually approve in a given year. The more the merrier in this case, as we have targets to ensure that there's about 650 of them a year redeemed. And if people have questions at the end, as Aoife said, I'm more than happy to take questions on that. The Innovation Partnership is a bigger program. I'll go into that in a bit more detail because the few more rules at this. So the idea of it, again, is to encourage companies to access the R&D capability and the support for up to 80% of the research costs available to a company. For an Innovation Partnership, you do have to be a client of one of the state agencies. That's either a LEO, UDROS, Enterprise Ireland, or the IDA, and you have to work with your what we call development advisor in Enterprise Ireland or your regional executive or something in the other agencies to actually apply. So how does it work? So you have to be also a manufacturing internationally traded service company and operating in Ireland. You apply by identifying to your DA what the technical challenge you have and what it is you want to do. And then we would have various meetings with you to understand what type of project it is, how it fits, and what grant rates may be available while bringing you through the process. The grant rates depend on the size of the company, whether you're small, medium, or large, and it also depends on the type of work you're doing. So there are definitions you can find on our website as to what's experimental collaborative development, and that's more taking existing research and stuff that already exists and putting it together in a new product or new process or service, versus industrial collaborative research, which is about, for want of a better word or an easy way to describe it, a more inventive process where you're developing new technologies. So the rates then are obviously appropriate to that. Now, part of the rates here also include this word collaborative. And what that means is that the intellectual property, if any, is generated out of this, would belong to the institution at the end of the program. And that can be contentious because a lot of companies think, oh, I'm giving away my intellectual property. Well, in fairness, you're not really. What you're doing is you're collaboratively developing it, and you're getting an opportunity then at the end of that to actually access that uniquely where nobody else can. So you can get territorial or sales market specific, territory specific access to that nobody else has by negotiating a deal with the institution. And there is a national guideline and there are national IP protocols for that I'd suggest people read. But look, in fairness, if you're a small company and you do develop something as a patent that has to be protected, if you want ownership of that, well, then all that cost falls on you. Whereas if you're getting a license from an institution, all those costs are borne by the institution, and you only start paying a license or a royalty once you start selling. So it's stacked much more in your favor to do it that way. So how does the process actually work? So first thing, obviously, you need to have a discussion both between the company and the college and with your development advisor. Develop an outline proposal, which then comes into the innovation partnership team for review, and they just check eligibility and make sure that what you're doing will fit under the program. You're then invited to put in a full application where there's some commercial and technical assessments done. We use basically our own people where possible internally to do the technical and commercial sessions, but a lot of times we might not have that expertise depending on what you're doing, and we hire people in to do that. And finally, the approval stage is that it would go to the Industrial Research Commercialisation Committee for approval. And if it's greater than 1.2 million, it would have to go to the Enterprise Ireland board. There is an express process where if the value of the work is less than €85,000, we can do line approval, and you can skip having to go to the IRCC. So that can save a month in the process of doing that. The benefits, look, you can get highly innovative products and service and process developed. For a lot of companies, it's their way of kickstarting it and upskilling staff. And I suppose the biggest thing here is if the state are investing up to 80% of it, it's relatively low risk for the company in terms of doing that. So if you're interested in that and want to find out more details, that's the Innovation Partnership team. So it's Lawrence Lee, Eileen McGoldrick, and Michael Tracy. So the email address there is ipp@enterprise-ireland.com, or you can see the team's individual emails down there. So that's what I have to talk about today. Aoife, again, quite happy to take questions on that at the end.
Great, thanks a million, Mark. That was a great introduction into the EI tech gateways and importantly, the R&D funding available for the cosmetic companies. It's great that the companies can avail of the 4th innovation voucher as well now. So thank you for highlighting that. Now we'll move on to the next part of the event, where I will introduce 3 speakers from 3 different tech gateways to provide an overview of the available technologies, some case studies and examples of testing available to support cosmetic SMEs. So first up, I'd like to introduce you to Liam Lewis from the Centre for Advanced Photonics and Process Analysis, CAPA, MTU in Cork. So if you'd like to share your screen, please, Liam, that'd be great. And I'll hand over to you.
I will. No problem. So hopefully you guys can see that.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I'm going to stop my video just to conserve some bandwidth and open that up to slideshow. So hopefully that should be full screen for everybody there.
Yeah, we can see it there. Thank you.
Okay, excellent. Thanks a million. So yeah, so thanks Aoife, and thanks to the guys in MTU Kerry, our colleagues down there, for inviting us to talk this morning. I'm going to touch a little bit about our own centre and give you some very, very top level examples of the type of things we can do for cosmetics companies. So just a little bit of background, we are a research centre based in the relatively newly formed Munster Technological University. There's some particular numbers that make up our group. So we have, around 35 people at any given time. There's a mixture of dedicated researchers and postgraduates, and we have some academic staff on the board as well. Very strongly engaged with companies through the Gateway program, as Mark mentioned. And we access a lot of the funding schemes that are there and that are available for companies to become involved in. I would say that you may have looked at some of those slides and thought, okay, there's a lot of information there. I wouldn't worry too much about that information. Certainly all the gateways will be very well versed in all of those processes. So your first port of call should be to discuss the project. Funding is kind of secondary. I think there's a lot of options for companies. I think it's excellent. There's an excellent opportunity for companies to get involved in R&D through supported funding. So you can let some of the gateways certainly worry about that. We have a number of big projects, small and large, going, and that's essentially where we are. So our speciality is photonics, and that's very simply the generation and manipulation of light. So light interacts in some way with almost all substances. So you get light falling on the substance. It's either transmitted through it, it's reflected from it, or it's absorbed and re-emitted. And one of the challenges we find sometimes with talking to people is that they have a little bit of a narrow view of what light is. So they tend to think of it as the rainbow colors that they're very much familiar with. But of course, there's an awful lot more to that spectrum than, I suppose, meets the eye, pardon the pun. There's the UV or the deep UV, and then there's the near and mid infrared that's also very useful. And those extra colors, if you like, the ones that we don't necessarily see or are aware of, are extremely useful in probing different types of substances. And what you get is something that looks a little bit like that. You get what we would call a spectrum, but it gives you information about what's going on inside in your material. And again, the light itself is a little bit agnostic as to what it's being shined on. So we've done projects involving, cheese or pharma products, cosmetics, certainly, biological products, medical products, food, agri, feedstuffs. All of those are essentially applicable here because they just have different interactions and different engagements with the light as it passes through. The process itself of taking those measurements is relatively straightforward. I think the key is understanding exactly then what you see afterwards, but that's where a lot of our expertise comes into play. Photonics is extremely broad ranging in terms of its applications, and there's just a few there. The photonics market and the photonics application space is absolutely massive. A lot of those areas, particularly sensing and detection, imaging and microscopy, medical device information, all of those are areas in which we're very strongly operative in. And as I said, it's very much an enabling technology. It sits a lot of the time in the middle in terms of developing sensors and systems which can generate and take data, which is further moved and used along the process line or the product development line. So it really is very, very, very broadly applicable. We have a fair amount of specialized equipment, a lot of it funded by our colleagues in Enterprise Ireland, thank you for that, which helps us to span that wavelength range that that I spoke about earlier. And that's where a lot of the very important information can be gathered from these products. What you find is that for natural products in particular, and what we might call biological products, the interesting information is not in that visible area that we would be used to. It's more in the shorter wavelength or in the longer wavelength. And all of this kit here allows us to generate, manipulate and detect light at those different wavelengths. And that allows us then to be a little bit more particular, a little bit more probing in terms of the information we gather from here. And that helps us to tell us a lot then, and consequently you, about what's happening within your product or in terms of interaction with your product and another substance, or interesting things that you may be interested in. We have a fairly broad thematic approach across food, pharma, med, agri. All of these areas, as I said, are fairly applicable to us. You can probably break it down into a few different ones that are more applicable to this side of what we're talking about this morning. So product analysis, so looking at changes in a product or product development, process monitoring, how you go about perhaps developing a product and how that is affected by the processes that you use. Quality control obviously is very important in terms of consistency, conformity, health and safety indeed in some aspects. And packaging, of course, is very important, how potentially it looks and feels, and you'll get some of that information from our other colleagues, but more importantly from our side is how that packaging may interact with your product. And of course, there's some packages will be more applicable to other products in different areas. So those are the four kind of key, I suppose, areas that we would operate in that are applicable here this morning. In cosmetics, as I said, that the UV is potentially an area of great information. So that shorter wavelengths that you look at, and some of the things you can see are the spectral features themselves. So these are these sort of bumps, if you like, that Manhattan skyline you may see in the response, which gives you information about the product that you're investigating. So it may be something as simple as where the UV absorption is. So you could imagine things like sun creams or cosmetics that are intended to serve a few different purposes. The broader spectrum absorption, where exactly does this does this reflect or absorb light? That may be important in terms of therapies or in terms of some natural elements or the skin health. Packaging analysis, if a product has a particular absorption in one particular area, that can indicate that it may or may not be suitable for putting into specific types of packaging. And of course, that packaging suitability, then we can test packages as well and look at where that particular level of compatibility may or may not be. If we look at some of things like Raman spectroscopy, which is one particular area, and again, the details of what Raman is are not particularly relevant here. It's more what it can tell you. So you can see things like the constituent identification. So does your product contain what you expect it to contain, or something else that you perhaps don't want it to contain, such as a contaminant? Things like the relative amounts are also potentially things we can gauge. It gets a little tricky when you're talking about very small percentages in very large volumes of a particular product, but it's certainly doable. And product consistency, of course, you can check from one product type to another, ensure that batch to batch is the same, or overall product to product is the same. One particular aspect that's quite interesting is maybe the spatial distribution of products. So if you have a mix or a blend that has a particular ingredient that's something that's unique to your product, you certainly want that to be available, if you like, in each particular sample that the customer might use. So you can use a combination of both spectral and what we call spatial imaging. So looking at where in the sample those particular products are located. This is something that's very strongly analyzed in the pharmaceutical industry, because particular blends are proprietary, and you can spot issues with contaminants or potentially fake products by looking at the blend. You will find that the constituents may be the same, but how they're distributed within the actual product themselves are very different. We can also do things like particle size analysis, and that may be important for things like how it interacts with pore sizes and stuff like that. Other simpler tests, I guess, we can look at temperature and humidity storage. Obviously, and potentially your products may have to sit in various different environments, in various different, hopefully, areas around the world if you're exporting. Things like freeze-thaw cycling, if your product is exposed to cold temperatures while under transport, or you wanted it certainly to be able to perform. Accelerated UV exposure, again, quite obvious perhaps where that's useful. Things like color rendering, potentially for lipsticks, I suppose, is the obvious example. You again want how that color looks, and that's what color rendering means. You can color a particular thing as you desire, but how it looks is dependent on both the lighting and the product itself. So there are some aspects of that color rendering, or how the color looks, that are not necessarily under control. As an aside, one of the areas that's particularly important in is the area of things like fruit and veg. So if you look at fruit and vegetables with a particular color of light, they may seem a lot less appealing than they do in the normal light that they should be viewed in. So this is important. Specific color analysis, again, for consistency, and things like color matching that look across the areas there. And just if you're wondering, I suppose, where does this all fit in, or Photonics seems a little bit aloof from where cosmetics are doing, I've just taken a few very simple things, and you can find these yourselves on the internet, of where some of the larger companies are working with Photonics applications. So L'Oreal are doing an iridescent feature in lipstick, so that's to give it that glossy shine or the sheen. And they're also looking at broad dermatology. They're looking at Raman for analyzing skin types and constituents, and then developing bespoke types of cosmetics that work better with those skin types. Colgate look at things like low-level light therapy, something that's been around for a while, but is now being looked at for things like gum health and multispectral facial analysis. So again, looking at the skin types in the face and what particular cosmetics might be useful for that. Clinique have an app that looks at facial recognition and does a suggestion then for what types of styles and colors and types of makeup may suit a particular skin type. And Gillette, the razor guys, are looking at a laser therapy integrated into a razor. So for those of you who don't like to shave, and that includes the men as well, there's options there for adding additional suppression of things like hair growth into the actual products that are there. So, despite the fact that Photonics might be a little bit removed in the first level from cosmetics, there are a lot of high-level companies doing a lot of very fundamental research on that. So they're very, very useful. So that's a very quick tour of what we have to do. I would say, you know, your one takeaway perhaps from this morning should be, if you have an idea or an issue you want, you know, talk to people. Both the colleagues in Enterprise Ireland and the Leo and my colleagues who are here from in a while are all very well versed in all of this, and we'll be happy to bring you through it. And I think there's a lot of useful information you can get from just having a conversation. So thank you for that.
Thanks, Liam, for that very interesting talk. It was really great to hear about Kappa and the technologies available for the cosmetic companies. And again, as I mentioned earlier, if you have any questions for Liam or any of the other speakers, there will be time at the end to ask questions. So thanks again, Liam. Next up, I'd like to introduce you to Richard White from Design Plus Technology Gateway in IT Carlow. So if you'd like to go ahead and share your screen, please, Richard, that'd be great.
Yeah. 1 second there, Aoife.
No worries.
Can you see that okay? Slideshow?
Yeah, great.
Perfect. Thanks very much, Aoife, and thanks for organising the event. It's been great so far. So first off, guys, I'm just going to introduce the Design Plus Gateway, the team, what we do, and then we'll look at some case studies that are probably relevant to today's talk. So Design Plus, we're based in IT Carlow, and as Mark said earlier, we're one of 16 technology hubs based around the country. This is, I suppose, just a guideline to where we are. We do focus companies, a lot of companies in around the southeast, but again, you don't have to work with the gateway that's closest to you. We'd often get referrals from companies and link up with other gateways that might be best suited to the client. So looking at the team that we have here in Design Plus, so Eilish Delaney is the current gateway manager. She's on maternity leave, so I'm currently standing there at the moment. I have my colleague Sadeep, who works with myself from a business development point of view, and he also manages the projects on a daily basis. We then have Jack Gregan and Billy House, who are our lead product designers, and Colin Eyre and Lynn Whelan, who are our design strategists. So what we primarily focus on in Design Plus and the Design Plus team is projects in around design strategy. So this is a very new learning, a new offering that we've developed, and has really come to light over the last 2 years. So it's a lot of online workshops, working with companies who are going through, I suppose, either a startup position or a transitional phase, and looking at action plans, creating strategic roadmaps for the company, going through different processes, and then, I suppose, guiding them into the next stage of their, I suppose, their pathway. The product design team with Billy and Jack focused more on physical products and concepts. So we get a lot of clients coming to ourselves who have ideas. So they're thinking of different ideas that come up, or product development. They may be at different stages. They may be at very much a startup stage where they have an idea in their head. We can then go through the process, look at getting it to first stage, creating a number of concepts, then creating 3D CAD modeling, or getting it to a stage where we can then move it onto a prototype. And whether that be a physical prototype that we can produce through maybe linking with one of the other areas in the IT, or using some of the 3D printers. So again, as Lee mentioned, we've a number of high quality pieces of equipment that we're supported by through the Enterprise Ireland capital calls, with a new 3D printer on the way in the next couple of months, which is great. So it just means we're keeping up to industry standard, what exactly people want, so we can draw people into to ourselves. So say outside of the Design Plus core team, then there's other teams that we work on within the gateway. So as I mentioned, design strategy and product design. We also have engineering, which is our Eng core team, ICT, which is game core, and then bioscience, which is BioCore and Health Core, and that's probably what's most applicable for today's talk. So just going to look at a couple of case studies. So we've a couple of PIs, principal investigators, who have a lot of industry experience in coming from cosmetics background before moving into the institute in IT Carlow. So we're quite strong. We've done a number of projects. We usually average between 3 or 4 projects a year. Now, unfortunately, a lot of the projects are at a stage where they haven't gone all the way through or are still in the process. So I won't be able to give away too many details around the companies, but I have just going to talk through some of the projects that we worked on. These projects are based on companies coming to us with innovation vouchers, just your standard €5,000 innovation voucher Mark mentioned earlier. I think they're a good stepping stone for anyone out there who hasn't worked with, I suppose, a research partner before. It's very much a stepping stone to the bigger projects like the innovation partnerships or even the direct funding, because you can build a relationship with the gateway, and then you can also build a relationship with your researchers. So you know exactly what's happening, you know the process, you understand what you can receive as a company. You know, it is very important to remember, as Mark mentioned, we are coming from a research point of view. We're not competing directly with industry in our offerings. So we've one of the first project we'll speak about is someone who came to ourselves, actually coming from the cosmetic industry, and worked in beauty for a number of years, having seen a lot of problems with the products she was using, a lot of complaints from customers. She had come up with an idea in her head of what she wanted to produce. So having a number of products that she believed were important in the development of the product that she wanted to get to market. So she came with an innovation voucher through a number of discussions, then sitting down what exactly we want to get from this. We have to come up with a plan that what we could do with her opinions and her, I suppose, her USP was looking at creating a number of lotions, creams, mists, lip balm, being able to produce a lip balm that had including SPF. So through a number of discussions, we came up with the formulation, testing different products, different styles, and then came up with a solution that the client was happy with. Once the client was happy with those products, then the next step is, before this is all still part of the innovation voucher, we carry out a 12-week stability evaluation, which is done on site. So in our facilities, we have storage incubators go up to 400 degrees. This is done over 12 weeks. So at the end of the 12 weeks, the client now has a report of all the testing that was carried out to prove, okay, this works, it does exactly what it is, what it says. Any issues that are outlined are outlined. If there's any splitting, anything like that, any products that didn't turn out as she wished, then we might have an issue with. She also has formulation of a number of products, and something that she's then ready to go to the next stage. The second case that we worked on is something that's live at the moment, and going back to Tomas's point at the start, you just mentioned how at the moment you're dealing with a lot of companies maybe who are at farmer markets, things like that. So we had a company come to us who are in that position. They're selling locally at the market, so they're producing skincare, hair care products at home, doing it for a number of years on a small scale. As COVID kicked off, they saw a huge growth in sales through social media. So they were moving to multiple markets. People were out and about a little bit more after the lockdown. So their sales increased a lot, and everything was going very well for them. But then they started to raise the question, okay, we haven't got any of our products tested. Are we liable if somebody comes back to us with an issue? What do we do next? So they at the time were sole traders. So spoke to ourselves over a year ago. We explained the process with the innovation voucher. So they actually went off and registered as a limited company, came back with a CRO number. We guided them through the process of applying for an innovation voucher, then got the innovation voucher approved, and we're now in the process of testing their products. So we got a range of products from them. We're carrying out 12-week stability testing. So the 12-week stability testing is a requirement for the EU Commission for these products to be listed and sold. So we're in the process of carrying out those tests now. We're also carrying out some compatibility testing on the packaging. That's something that Lee mentioned as well. So it is, it's all important. It's not just the product. It's everything involved in the product, and that's everything that must be tested. I suppose the difference of somebody coming to us on those last two projects is we people coming who didn't have experience in what they needed. So they weren't coming with advice for us. They're pretty much coming to us with their hands up, saying, okay, we need guidance with this. I think that's where the research part can come in. You're actually getting the added value of working with somebody on a one-to-one basis. And the PI that we work with and the gateway, we can guide. And I think it's important to realize, it may not always be successful. We don't just keep working until it's successful. It's very much a research part of the project. Besides those two just short case studies, what else we've worked on over the years is working with clients in regards to ingredient listing, packaging advice, recommendations. We've also brought companies who we've worked with on early stages from formulation point of view, and then into, okay, what is needed from a factory setup? What's the minimum requirement? What do you need that you can get then be operational? And then again, also just registering with the products with the European Union, so they're supposed to then in a position to sell them and they're not liable. And that's important, I think, for a lot of the new startups. Just briefly to finish up, I know Mark mentioned the vouchers, but we do work with the vouchers up to direct funding and also the innovation partnerships. From, I think, the previous case studies, they can really highlight the benefits of the innovation vouchers, especially for startups. You know, when, as a larger company comes to ourselves, innovation partnerships come to mind, definitely probably a better option in the long run. But from a startup point of view, the innovation vouchers are really, really good access into research that's available. They're low cost, and the 5,000 euros completely covered. It's just a case of speaking to a researcher and I suppose deciding what the project is going to be, how is it best to work on the project. So again, go back to Liam's point, I wouldn't be too hung up on exactly what funding is there. It's more just getting the project nailed down, what exactly I want from this project. Again, just contact, if you are interested, just contact one of the gateways. Contact ourselves, we're always free for a conversation. We can guide you. If it's something we can help out with, great. We can guide you through the process with completing your innovation voucher application. Or if it's not something that we're capable of doing, we do collaborate with the other 16 gateways. By ourselves, we're in the IFG cluster, we're in the EMD cluster, so we would be in conversation a lot with the other gateways out there. And I suppose the whole idea is that we can't help you out, someone else in the gateway can. That is just the end of the presentation. But if anyone has any questions, please feel to ask at the end, or I think we can get our details from Aoife. Drop me an email, we can organise a conversation anytime.
Perfect. Thanks very much, Richard, for that informative presentation. It was a great overview of the R&D capabilities at Design Plus. I'm sure there might be a few questions for you at the end of the event, so thank you. So our final speaker for today is Neil Burke from Shannon Applied Biotechnology Centre, co-located between MTU in Kerry and TUS in Limerick. So I'll hand over to you, Neil.
Thanks very much, Aoife.
You're welcome.
Can you see my screen okay?
Yeah, it's just going into presenter mode now.
Taking its time.
Yeah.
That's great. Hopefully that should be visible there now. So thanks very much. So as Aoife mentioned, my name is Neil Burke and I'm a business development scientist with Shannon ABC. And so you've had a good introduction and insight into the technology gateways in Ireland. And so Shannon ABC falls within that cluster. So this morning I'm just going to tell you a small bit about Shannon ABC and our team, and mention some of the technologies that we have available and discuss some of the work that we've done with cosmetic companies in Ireland. Okay, so you've seen this map a few times this morning, but I suppose, as Aoife mentioned there, what's unique to Shannon ABC is that we are co-located between the Technological University of the Shannon Midlands and Midwest and Munster Technological University. And so we have essentially the resources of two of those institutes and universities across two locations. The infographic here is kind of sums up some of the key numbers for Shannon ABC and what we deliver for companies in Ireland. But I suppose what I'd like to draw your attention to here is that the projects range from everything between 3 days to 3 years, and from a cost of, 85 euros all the way up to millions. So basically, ultimately, there's no project too small or large, really, and we can cover quite a lot for companies. So yeah, again, just to highlight the fact that we're leveraging across two campuses, that just offers us more scope and use of facilities and expertise. Okay, so our team at Shannon ABC is quite a multidisciplinary team, and it involves kind of 4 Tech Gateway staff, in or around 19 central researchers, and currently at the moment around 22 postgraduate students. And kind of having that number of researchers and staff allows quite a broad coverage of expertise, everything from microbiology to analytical chemistry, plant science, and I suppose for myself and the team in NTU Kerry, this mammalian cell culture, which we'll talk a bit about in a second. So typically in the kind of continuum of coverage of research that we can do with a company and their products, kind of falls from everything from product extraction and ingredient extraction to purification and concentration, identification of that, and then the efficacy testing, both from a lab base and from a human volunteer approach. So essentially the slide here is just to cover the scope of the type of work that we can do with cosmetic companies and companies in general, from a very basic start all the way to a product that's pretty much ready for market. Okay, so on our campus in South Campus in NTU Kerry, we have 2 designated cell culture suites, and these are state-of-the-art facilities and allow us to perform a range of techniques and assays related to testing ingredients and extracts in mammalian cell lines. So just to mention 2 of the cell types that we work with that would be most relevant to the cosmetic sector. And these are keratinocytes and dermal fibroblasts. And as you can see from this slide here, they just represent the 2 top or upper layers of the skin. And I suppose one of the advantages of having this differentiation of these cell types is, for example, if you wanted to differentiate between the damage associated from the UVA light and UVB light. So one, if you're looking for the damage done from to the sunburn, we say, for example, versus that done to the deeper layer that causes wrinkles, we're able to use a specific cell line to investigate that damage, and we have special equipment to administer the UVB and the UVA lights to the cells. And so you can treat the cells with your products and controls or ingredients and see if there's any reduction in damage done in those settings. Okay, so some other laboratory tests that we can routinely carry out in relation to cosmetic products in the skin is we can assess the impact on elastin and collagen. We can determine if ingredients have antioxidant or anti-inflammatory capabilities. And we can also assess their impact on skin barrier function. And we have lots of different pieces of equipment to test these. So recently, thanks to funding from Enterprise Ireland, we purchased a highly specialized camera from Mirvex. And what this allows us to do is acquire very detailed information and images to give us understanding of products' impact on skin pigmentation, skin texture, wrinkles, and redness, among other things. And this is a very easy to use and highly informative piece of equipment that can be used on human volunteers. So similar to that, we also have a skin analysis system. And what this involves is a series of specific probes that can measure parameters such as skin elasticity, moisturization, and wrinkles, as well as other parameters. So between those 2, we can cover quite a lot and test quite a lot in human volunteers with prototype formulations. Okay, so just I'm going to briefly mention a case study that was done with Voya a couple of years ago. And so Voya came to Shannon ABC and looking to get further information on different types of seaweed that they were looking into. So the seaweed forms a big part of Voya's products, and they wanted to determine which seaweed would have higher bioactivity for one of their skincare products. And so we were able to test those in the lab and determine the different levels of antioxidant and anti-inflammatory properties within those. And Voya then used that information to go back and develop prototype formulation. Once that formulation was safety tested, we were then able to get involved again and to use that formulation in our volunteering panel in Kerry to validate the efficacy in their kind of final product. So that's just to give you an idea of the engagement from earlier stage of the product development all the way to formulation that's being prepared for market. Okay, so Shannon DC has worked with the cosmetic industry in Ireland for just over 10 years now. And this slide here just highlights a number of the companies that we've engaged with, and there's been quite a range of involvement between these companies, as I mentioned at the start, from short projects all the way to much longer projects, and looking more in depth at mechanisms of their products and how they are benefiting the skin, for example. And so I hope this morning you get an idea of the type of work that Shannon DC does and can do for cosmetic companies. And so we'd love to hear from you if you have any interest. You can get further information on the website there, or you can contact us directly, and we'd be more than happy to arrange a call to discuss. So thank you very much for your attention.
Great. Thanks, Neil, for that very interesting and informative presentation. So that brings us to the end of our presentations. Thank you very much to the 5 presenters here today.